Put my phone on silent. There we go. Right, good. We're in, I think. Good evening, everybody. Just going to come in the room now. So yeah, good. We're a little bit later than normal, only because we've got the lovely Ian and Dominique coming to us live via satellite from Australia. Good evening, good morning to both of you.
Morning.
Morning, mate. We've lost sound.
We've lost sound.
There you go. No, I've muted myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, good morning. So really appreciate you joining us, because I know the time difference now. Hi, Mary. Great. Say hi, everybody, when you come in. Good to see you all. So, well, we've known each other a little while, Ian. I can't remember how we met now. I feel we're kind of buddies, even though we've never met in life, but it's been a while, I think.
It has. It's been 2 or 3 years now. It started with me having listened to you on Beyond the Opera, and then asking you to come on my old podcast, which you gracefully did and blew our minds. So thank you very much for that. Yeah, it's been a couple of years now.
Yeah, great. Well, you've got a new podcast coming up, which we must talk about in a bit. And Dominique, we met before on that podcast, didn't we? I think that's when we met. Was it for that? I think we got together. What was it?
No, I've never actually met you, Andrew. I think that was Sophie.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. That was, I remember there was a duo there.
Different duo.
Different duo. Well, it's great to see you, Dominique, and thank you for joining us tonight. Do you know, I've been really looking forward to this, because you've come up with a great kind of model, a great rubric, really, for us to be really mindful about how we educate, how we interact, what we are trying to promote when working with our clients and with our dogs. But actually, you know, thinking about these 4 really important words that go to make care: communication, advocacy, relationship, and enrichment. They're good things to bear in mind just for our own lived experience, actually, and the relationships we have with each other. So we're going to unpack those kind of things in a moment. But just so people know, you can kind of take in turns a little bit, or talk together. It's up to you. Tell me a little bit about your journeys to this point, and how you've come to be working with dogs, and importantly, how you've ended up having this kind of outlook about how we should be working and to build those relationships that we have with our doggies.
Yeah.
Dominique first, yes.
Ladies first. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I ended up working with dogs. I started in rescue in 2006. That was over in Ireland, and then came back to Australia, started studying, became a Delta qualified trainer, and have just spent the last 10 years or so continuing education with, you know, Dr. Susan Friedman, which I just have a girl crush on. I think she's amazing. Michael Shikashio, Grisha Stewart, yourself, Kim Brophy, you know, the list goes on and on. Ended up meeting Ian, would have been
8 years ago.
Yeah, 8 years ago. And over time we became friends. And then through COVID, this came up. We were just talking through COVID, and we just really wanted to, we noticed there was a lot of stuff online, because we couldn't do in-person consultations. So a lot of people were going straight to online, and there was just so much bad information out there that people were seeing and utilizing, because they just didn't know what they were seeing. So we had a conversation. We just really wanted to put together something that aligned with our values in terms of how we work with dogs and how people should interact with their dogs. And we came up with what was almost a 10-hour course.
Yeah.
That we called Dogs Unpacked, and we presented that to some people, and you know, got some really good feedback. The information that we put in there was, we tried to put pretty much everything that we could, and we still didn't really touch the sides of understanding dog behavior, understanding dogs' emotions and how they elicit behaviors, how to actually train a dog, body language, just basic science of it. And then as we kind of went on, we went, okay, there's more to this than just an 8-hour, 10-hour course. And that's when we came up with the C.A.R.E approach.
Yeah, it's both Dom and I, while going on, if you looked at, from a bird's eye view, if you looked at our journey to where we got, we it's very different, but we ended up, as we were talking, realizing we had a lot of things in common, where as we were working with clients, there was more to just trying to get the dog to comply. When we're both doing in-person consultations, we've both got our own independent of each other training businesses, but we were just talking about cases we were working on, and a lot of what we were doing, while the methodology wasn't identical, the principles and the values were identical, and we realized we had so much in common, and we learned a lot about the tactics of what to do from one another. Like, to this day, we still bounce off of one another, like, how would you achieve this result? Because we're still learning from each other to this day, but pretty much from day one, because those values aligned, we were able to kind of streamline and talk more about the tactics, because we were coming from that common ground. And yeah, that C.A.R.E approach that we've come up with, it sounds ridiculous, but that we kind of mangled together, was basically what we were trying to look at. Wasn't just like a framework for people to be able to train their dogs. It was more like, okay, what's this? What kind of covers how to live with a dog, how to create a healthy and happy lifestyle with our dogs? We can apply it to training, but it's more than that. It's definitely, it's more all-encompassing, and we were saying off air before, like, those 4 topics, each one of them in itself, you could do a full presentation on. We're not going to today, but when we knit them together, it kind of creates a nice, well-rounded picture on how people can live healthy and happy lives, and a lens to look at, like, dog training through.
And those lenses are broad, aren't they? Because you kind of have created this. I think the thing for me is, we all know there's nothing new under the sun, right? But what is unique for us all is our own interpretation of it and how we filter it, and then coming up with these different models and formats that we think, actually, all that stuff kind of fits with this. And the beautiful thing about that is, there will be people listening tonight who are thinking, that actually fits for me. The way my brain wants to see stuff, that model fits for me. And I think that's why it's important that we keep looking at this and keep feeling energized to discuss these topics, because it's important. On a more general level, just for us in the UK and people in the States and around the world listening in, what's the kind of general culture like in Australia regarding dog training? Is it quite progressive? Is it stuck a little bit in the kind of more, more dated things? What's the general culture?
It depends who you ask.
Yeah.
It really does depend on who you ask. I do feel like I've been working here since 2000 probably 11 unofficially, but yeah, don't tell the tax man. And the culture has there is more of an educated public these days. I definitely feel that. There are definitely still those old school archaic views where dogs just must comply, but they're becoming, I feel like they're becoming less and less prominent, but maybe that's just the circles that I'm running in. So I don't know if that's just my own confirmation bias or if that's actually the case.
Yeah, I think, we do communicate a lot with people in the same industry, obviously, who have the same belief systems as ourselves. But what I'm finding in terms of the clients that I'm seeing, like, you know, a woman I spoke to yesterday who she had seen someone else, and the methods that that particular person was using is completely opposite to what you and I and yourself would use. And I do find that quite often. I am hearing a lot of people that I speak to that, you know, I'm the second or third trainer down the line that they've spoken to or they've seen, and the methods and the methodology and the belief systems that the other trainer were using were completely different to mine. And I think that comes down to the wording and the marketing of some of these trainers. So I think that they're still very prevalent in Australia. The information that's coming out from trainers like ourselves is at the forefront, but I think, you know, kind of like what you were saying before, perception is everything in terms of where your bias and needs are at the time. So, and especially with the internet, dependent on what you are looking up and what you're Googling will depend on what actually comes onto your screen. So, you know, a lot of these trainers are still very much out there and still very much competing against us. Like, it does seem to be a competition as opposed to, it's never a conversation, which is really unfortunate.
And it's good what you said about how the general public, their understanding of their dog's care and sport needs is shifting. I think that is happening, and we get kind of embroiled, don't we, in the whole shock collar debates and everything else. But actually, a lot of my clients, when we just happen to be having a cup of tea and we're talking about these things, they are shocked that they're even legal in the first place. And they might be more representative of the general public, actually, who are just trying to do the best by their dogs. We can tend to get sucked into the extremes, don't we? I think what we hear and what we see. Good, great. Well, I think that's important. I think let's go into this model then, because I think, you know, we can spend a lot of time in each of these words really, and you can explain them more fully for us. Is there anything you want to say about the model more generally before we look at the individual words?
I don't think you can. Every single one of them knits in, and as we talk about this, you will start to see the relationship between all four. You know, we will, during the talk, we'll isolate them, but we will not be able, it will be impossible for us as we go through and isolate down the track without referring back to what we've already talked about. They're all intricate parts, and without not one of them standing alone is enough. No, it is. That's why it is, you know, a model that and I think it's a model that we should really look when we're engaging with other people. You know, we really need to take everything into consideration and, you know, stand back and really listen and hear from both our dogs, but also the caregivers themselves, you know, and we do say that is part of one of the acronyms that we say. It's not just about, you know, advocating for your dog, it's about advocating for yourself and the wider community. So it is about a model that we do all encompass the human and the caregiver and people, the community around us as well.
And this is important, isn't it? Because we've had a survey come out recently, I think it's by the RSPCA, could be wrong, that said that I think it was 1 in 10 of the public that they surveyed understood stress signals and body language. Now we can think, yeah, well, that's right. But I think we have to, as trainers, as the training community, take some responsibility for this and think about what we're actually providing along with our functional training that we deliver in a class. That if the general public is still going away not knowing that their dog might be in pain, or that they might be struggling, or that they're stressed, or that they're overloaded, or they're overwhelmed, or they're too busy processing, or whatever it is they might be going through, it's a disservice, I think. And this is what I love about your care model, because it really focuses in on what we can do more as a trainer to give extra awareness to the general public, the kind of end user, if you like. Good, let's go then. Fire away. Let's see where this takes us.
I'll let you start off with communication.
Okay, so obviously C is for communicate. And what we mean by that is having a dialogue with your dog. So we've come from this, I suppose, the old school obedience, where it was more of a monologue. We're telling the dog what to do all the time, and the dog must be obedient. And, we used words like commands instead of cues. And what that really did was, a massive disservice to our dogs, obviously, because we were not taking into consideration what they were trying to tell us. They're always giving us feedback, and they're always looking for feedback. So the conversation was always one-sided, and now that we look at our dogs from a different lens, and we look down, and it's, if I work with a client, I see the dog and I'm like, how are you? How can I help you? What are your needs right now? And it's interesting when you start to look at your dog from that perspective of, we're going to communicate with you, where it's a back and forth dialogue, to understand and see how we can then build on the relationship, but also really create that bond and understanding and safety for that dog, where they are being heard and their needs are being met. Because when we do look at dogs, they are always throwing information out at us, and we don't know. A lot of people don't know what they're looking at. The different body language signals that a dog might be giving out, where they're actually saying, I really need some help here. Sometimes that's just not heard, and that's where we end up, the intensity of the body language comes out. So then we see the behavioral issues that we all get called in for. So what we want people to do is communicate and understand what it is that their dog's trying to say to them, and give that feedback that they need, so that we can make them feel more comfortable, but also heard.
I love that word feedback, by the way, because I think everything is feedback, whether we want to see it that way or not. Because we ask the dog to do something, for example, well, they're either going to do it or they're not, and that's feedback, isn't it? And I don't think, as trainers, potentially in the past, we've been very good at waiting for that feedback.
The old model, the old obedience model, just didn't. Even that word, the language, like, it's something we talk about a lot. Is just the way that we talk will influence the way that we behave. And if we're talking about obedience, if we're saying we're essentially saying our dog must comply, which didn't afford trainers the environment in which to engage in that dialogue. And that's what we're trying to encourage people to just be aware of, is when you're communicating with your dog, it is much more than obedience, and it is a back and forth. So as soon as you ask or cue the dog to do something, their response is feedback for us to then interpret and respond appropriately to. Now, I say that because I think responding inappropriately would be to then force yourself, right? And that was probably more of the old model.
But even when we do, when we look at our dogs from that lens of asking the question to the dog, how are you? And responding, what I love seeing is, it's almost like the dog's like, oh my God, you can hear me. The response and the speed at which the conversation and dialogue then continues, where it's, how are you? I'm good. Can you do this? Yes, I can. What about this? And then you start to see how much I think, from what I think I'm seeing, the confidence build and the agency in that dog, where they're like, oh my God, my behaviors actually work for me. So then the relationship, which we go into later, then builds even more with the caregiver and the dog, because there is that conversation where both are being heard and the responses are clear. So there's not like, can you do this? What's that? Can you do this? Oh my God, do this. Yeah. And you can see a change in the body language of the dog, but also then the frustration from the caregiver when there's not that back and forth dialogue.
And knowing, and again, it's more of this awareness piece for people, because when you are building communication with a dog, it's inevitable when getting to know an individual, especially one that speaks a different language, at the beginning, it's going to be clunky. And as the species that are, we live in a human world and we're bringing dogs into our lives, it's our duty, it's not on the dog. We shouldn't be holding the dog accountable to be getting it right. So by raising awareness that, hey, look, you're now in a dialogue and your role is to kind of take responsibility for nurturing this communication pattern. It's not on the dog. So that in itself can reduce frustration, just knowing that, and it's not to say that it won't be frustrating and annoying if we don't get it right. I'm not saying that. I'm saying just knowing that, yeah, that might piss you off, but how about you just take a breath rather than get shitty with the dog?
I love this notion of nurturing communication. That's quite a powerful statement, that is, I think, quite powerful, the notion of nurturing conversation. And also what you said there about it being like a foreign language. So, my husband and I, we were in Greece recently. My Greek is very limited. So we're there with the guidebook. And so you're having to slow down to communicate. You're having to think about it, and you're having to say something and then wait for the feedback. That wasn't quite right. And it is that. And I think part of this thing about slowing down, it limits that frustration. And especially for dogs, I think, because they are often seeking something. And we all know that those seeking circuits, if they're not finding those outcomes, can flip into frustration very easily. So this is already pretty powerful stuff. And, nurturing communication, that's got to be a title of something you guys do in the future, I think, because I just love it. I think it's a powerful thing. And because it does need nurturing sometimes. And we have to allow ourselves to be available and be present to fully communicate, even with another human.
Yeah. And we won't dwell on any single one today. So I'll move on to the advocacy part, because this in itself is another huge topic that, again, we could go into for hours. But the reason why we chose the word advocacy is because I touched on it a second ago. We are the caregiver, right? We brought the dog into our world, and in doing so, it's our belief that we are now the caregiver, and so we need to be advocating for those in our care. And I think what's happened over the years in the dog training industry, the word leadership has been a little bit bastardized. Like, it's kind of got this really kind of almost militant and very domineering tone to it. If you're not being a good leader, a pack leader, it's seen as which is normally kind of comes with the notion that you kind of have to rule with a bit of an iron fist. It kind of comes with weakness if you're not going to step up to the plate and basically lead in that kind of old school, very domineering way. Well, then you're not a very good caregiver. But advocacy looks at leadership, in my opinion, through a very different lens. Because I think at the end of the day, we do have to step up and show healthy leadership in our lives, to our dogs, to guide them through this very human world. But advocacy looks at it through the lens of, I'm going to do that, but I'm also going to very much bear in mind what your fundamental needs are. I'm going to be aware of them. I'm going to care for them, and I'm going to be your advocate in these moments. And it's like Dom mentioned earlier, it's not just advocating for the dog either, it's advocating for ourselves. So the days where you're having a shit day, I really want people to go, that's okay. We all have bad days, and in this moment, I do need this. And that self-awareness, that kind of taking a step back and going, okay, I'm going to, for self-care, I might not walk my dog today. rather than, for example, I'm going to walk my dog out of sheer belligerence, but then take it out on my dog if I'm having a bad time. And then in the wider community, be the good, just, I hate this term, but like be the good Samaritan. If you can see somebody walking towards you on the street with a dog that's struggling, cross the road. Don't just belligerently walk towards them and ruin your dog, their dogs, and probably their day. Advocacy is a big topic, but I feel like it can bring a healthy model of leadership back into the dog training world.
Yes, because the psychology behind advocacy is a very powerful one, actually, when we think about what it does to our brain when we're in an advocacy state. And this is where, when we move our clients through that awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance that we go through, so they come to that point of acceptance, then they can advocate. And the advocacy and being able to advocate is one of the biggest antidotes to the expectational pressures and the judgments we feel around us, because we're going to advocate instead. But you're absolutely right, Ian. I think that's the powerful thing we just said there, is that to truly advocate for another, you can't advocate if you don't know what their care and support needs are. Otherwise, you're just getting them to do what you think is right for them, which is different, of course. So advocacy is a really powerful thing to consider. Dominic, sorry, were you going to, I think I chipped in.
Just more when the word leadership. So we kind of went through, you've got to be dominant, you've got to be alpha. So, there's always words that become taglines in every industry. And I think of late in the dog training industry that we've gone from alpha to leadership. But the perception of what leadership actually means, and I think even in any industry, when people think of a leader, what does that actually look like? It's not looking at someone who is domineering, who's a bully. Like, a true leader is the person that is there to help guide, to help give that information and support their peers or their employees or whatever the environment might be. So when we're looking at leadership in pairing with advocacy, it is about us. And as Ian said, dogs don't rock up onto our doorstep and knock on the door and go, hey, can I live with you? We bring them into our homes and we make that decision. So it is up to us to guide them and lay those foundations, taking in their needs as well as our needs, and finding that balance, as opposed to having a seesaw of consistent lacking on both sides. It's finding that really nice balance where the dog's needs are being met, the human's needs are being met, and there is going to be points of frustration because we're living, feeling beings, and we are working with a different species. But where you can then go, okay, I'm having, as Ian said, I'm having a bad day, and I'm just going to go and sit outside and have a coffee. We're not going to walk the dog today, or I'm going to go and have a glass of wine, or whatever it might be. But also noticing that when the dog might be struggling, that we advocate for them and say, if we do see that person coming down the road and they are not, hi, my dog's just struggling, would you mind? We have a huge problem over here with people walking their dogs off lead in on lead areas. So, having a person who might have a dog who struggles with other dogs, seeing someone walk down the road with an off lead dog, saying, hey, do you mind just popping your dog on lead because my dog has struggles? And, being okay with that, or even if the dog does react, as what we all feel, that kind of shame, as opposed to going, oh my God, I'm really sorry, because we feel that shame of what that person in front of us might be, or that judgment that person may have or have not, dependent on where we sit, rather than going, oh my God, I'm so sorry, like this, the dog's broken, saying, you know what, my dog struggles, and I'd really appreciate it if you put some space between your dog and mine.
Yeah. Andy, you've muted again, mate.
We can't hear you.
All right, that was because the dogs are barking. I'm really interested in this holding hanging around the leadership thing a little bit more, because I think it's really interesting how you're framing this on a couple of levels, really. First of all, this form of leadership through advocacy is actually really healthy for relationships, of course. Leadership through control and authority sets us up to fail ultimately, because if that end task or goal isn't met, then it's a blame problem. So that's why I think it's quite healthy. But also, there will be some people thinking who don't really feel comfortable with the leadership, term. But it's what the general public kind of already have in their psyche. So it's better to potentially say, okay, what kind of leadership are we looking to give then? And it's a good place to start that conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's this model of leadership that we're kind of talking about here. It's actually, for me, like framing it this way came not from the dog world, but looking at leadership models like from the human world in the workplace. Like, what does healthy leadership actually look like? So models like what Simon Sinek talk about or Brené Brown talk about are very relatable models to the human world. And we know that leadership through suppression, that kind of in the workplace is only going to foster unhealthy environments and unhealthy relationships. And we talk about this in a dog context, but we talk about I've got a team of amazing people working within my business, and if I applied that old school domineering methodology of leadership, well, my team wouldn't stick around, unless they felt like they were being pressured to do so, unless I'd kind of trapped them. And that's a horrible way of living. I would be living in fear of them leaving. I would be living in fear of them kind of revolting against me. And they would probably be living in fear of consequences of what might happen should they put a foot wrong, which is just going to foster an environment of stress. It's just going to be detrimental in the long run. Whereas if I step up, my goal every day, this applies dogs and my team, my goal is to create an environment in which they have got freedom of expression, not to the point where they've got so much freedom that they can do whatever they want and break themselves and others, but give them a framework, help them and go, hey guys, this is the confines of which we're going to work in, but to create something that's not so restricted that they feel suppressed. But they can't, if they were to make a mistake, that's okay. Because I've set up an environment in the first place where, well, mistakes are going to happen. That's inevitable. That's part of life. But if I know that, then I can afford for that in my kind of judgment, and being proactive as in that sense is really important. Because sure, like, yeah, you said this when you maybe in hindsight, this may have been a better option, but nobody got hurt because of it. And so we can learn, and ultimately the bottom line when it comes to advocacy is creating a space in which those in your care feel safe. That's the bottom line. That's the goal.
That's really cool. I love that. I love that little conversation. I sort of hang around the leadership thing, but as we know, dog trainers, especially on the positive side, they bulk at lots of things because of the pack leader thing, I think. But actually, this is a really healthy way of looking at stuff, and I like it. I think it's great. And I think this leadership through advocacy of taking the time to learn from the other first and then think, right, I'm the one who ultimately has to control all the resources and a lot of them around you. How can I put that framework, as you call it, in so that I can advocate for you better? It's a wonderful thing, and it's also, it's meeting people with a point that they're already perceiving that I somehow have to be the leader for this dog. And some people feel a bit overwhelmed by that. Actually, they think, God, I've got this dog and I've got to look after it. But this is a much more relational model. It's not so transactional.
It's also the model that whether we like it or not, we're in. When it comes to our dogs, we do control the resources, right? We can't actually help that. You know, we do control when they eat, when they sleep, when they pee, where they go. So we are already in a position where we do control the resources. And so we have to, in my opinion, in order to not be the domineering leader, it could be very easy to fall into that model, the old school model, because, well, as soon as unless you are taking on board those in your care's opinion and needs, well, then it's almost impossible to meet them, like you said a minute ago. And so I feel like this is a really important concept to get our heads around, because if you don't, and we come onto this later with enrichment, but if you don't, your dogs will start to get frustrated, because if their needs aren't being met, and that in itself may cause behavioral concerns, which in itself, we can then go full circle, because if our dogs are getting frustrated or expressing emotions that their needs aren't being met, well, if we're not looking at it through a lens in the first place of, well, I was actually in control of what you had access to or not, then you can come at it through bad dog for not complying. And so it sets a framework in itself of like, okay, if I'm looking to try to meet your needs in the first place, then you're understanding that their communication, their behavior is just an expression of, based on the environment we create for them in the first place, but it completely frames the way we might handle those behaviors that crop up.
Well, yeah, and also, but looking at when we see failure, not seeing it as failure, seeing it as information. You know, behavior is information in all living beings, and what that means for the individual itself. So if we're not advocating for them when we are, as Ian said, you know, we create this environment for them, we do. So if they do a behavior wrong, rather than seeing it from, you know, bad dog, why would you do that? Why would you do that to me? Because we then take it on personally. You know, some would say, I've given you this life, I give you everything. But again, the dog didn't choose that. So when we do see behaviors that are not favorable to us as humans, or it kind of poses the question of why did you do that, we have to see it as the question of, okay, why did you actually do that? And understand the why behind that behavior. And again, back to, you know, advocate for the dog and understand the reason behind why that behavior appeared.
This is brilliant, isn't it? Because you're right in what you said at the beginning, and because it all bleeds in. And isn't it great that it not only spells care, but they also happen to come in kind of the right order, right? Because we start off with that communication, so we can learn the needs, then we can advocate for them. And that brings us nicely on to this notion that then we're starting to create a really good foundation for that relationship. So let's get on to that relationship.
Yeah, so R is for building a relationship. And as you said, it is really relating to the dog, you know, having a look at them and being empathetic, not sympathetic. You know, as humans, we have a tendency to sometimes more sympathize with people, which, you know, no one wants sympathy. You know, we want people to empathize, to really take a step back and understand where we're coming from, how we might be feeling, and how we can then support. So then that's also building that relationship of how can I support you in your needs right now? What is it that you need? Or where did you come from? You know, what is your story, and how does that affect who you are and what you're doing right now? So I think, you know, when we do talk about amazing Kim Brophy's legs model that does, you know, again, looks back, takes in more of the lens of the dog. So we can have a look at, you know, their learning, their environment, their genetics, and their self. So then we can really relate to who they are and the behaviors that they might be displaying, as opposed to label them. Because again, as humans, we like to put things in boxes because it's much easier for our brain to understand. We go, okay, I'm going to pigeonhole you as this type of dog. I'm going to pigeonhole you as this type of dog. So whether we're doing it with specific breeds or whether we're going, okay, well, and I think we hear this a lot when it comes to rescue dogs. Oh, you've got a rescue. Oh, which instantly just puts that dog in a box. But also when people go, oh, so I remember working with a dog that years ago, and this dog struggled with other dogs, and the dog displayed some, lunging and barking. And this other person was like, oh, is it a rescue? Just straight off put the dog in a box, as opposed to, oh, wow, that dog's really struggling. Is there anything that, how can I help you? Or is there anything that you can tell me in terms of the information? Oh, actually, do you know what? I might move my dog away.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, relating and understanding from the dog, like getting in their paws, as opposed to just going, okay, well, you're this, so I'm going to put you in this box over here, and we really don't need to understand anymore.
What you just said there has just made me think, because it's really important, isn't it? This, how often, so say let's say you've got a dog who is not acting in a normal prescribed way, so they might be growling or barking or lunging. How the first thought for many in their brains, well, it must be a rescue then, as without thinking, oh, that dog must be stressed or struggling. And one of the realities, of course, is we're not very good at even recognizing stress in each other, actually, let alone another species. So that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that really, how quickly somebody's brain has to be to fill the gap there. This can't be a dog who is completely normal, just struggling right now.
Well, even when but when we are kind of not really going off topic, but when rescues came from somewhere, they were puppies that belonged to someone a majority of the time. So it's rather than relating to what that dog may have suffered or may have experienced and ending up in, a rescue or a shelter, it's putting a label on them that has a negative connotation that this dog is broken, as opposed to this dog may have experienced some terrible things. I mean, even, we've both worked in shelters. Being in a shelter or a pound is extraordinarily stressful for the dog. And that can have long-term effects on how they perceive the world and how they understand the world. So when people instantly put that label on a dog, it's not giving that dog the allowance of really relating and understanding and going, do you know what? You've suffered and I'm so sorry. How can I help you? So that's kind of going back to the beginning, the communicate and advocate, because we want to be there to create a foundation of trust and safety for that dog, as opposed to just labeling it and going, do you know what? It's a rescue. There's nothing I can do for that dog because it's broken.
And when it comes to knitting it together with the other ones, like that, being able to relate, being able to build that relationship, you have to take on the other elements of the acronym, right? Because communication, we said earlier about a dialogue. Now, in terms of their side of the dialogue, in order to be able to relate to them, you have to listen to them and to be able to hear them. And in order to do that in the first place, you actually have to be looking for that dialogue. You actually have to be looking at the dog and asking the questions of, like, what are your enrichment needs? And understanding those elements in the first place before you can then start advocating for them. And that in itself, we all bring dogs into our lives for a healthy relationship. Like I've said this a million times, but like we do it to make us and them happy. And the goal is ultimately to create something that is it's that kind of intangible, magical experience of why we have dogs in the first place. It's like, this is bloody amazing. Like, you're my best mate, you're the best company. You're not just some robo dog that does as you're told. But in order for that to be able to foster that, we need to relate to them. And in order to relate to them, we need to understand them before we can then step up for them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're right, the vast majority of people have a vision in their head when they get that dog of that relational model, the relational relationship that they're going to have. And it's interesting how we're almost freeing people away from the things that are going to constrain them against that kind of relational model, actually, by having this approach, all the things that we try and talk about. And actually, a lot of the discussions that go on about methods and tools, I don't think we're doing a good job by just fighting about methods and tools. Actually, I think we have to deliver something that's more appealing and is different for the caregiver, that they think, yeah, I want that. Actually, that's what I want. That's what I wanted all along.
Yeah, you said something important there. Like, we kind of have a preconceived idea of the lifestyle we'd like to live with our dogs, and no two people are the same. But the reason why the relationship element of it is so important is because, like with any relationship, there are always going to be like, hey, I would really like this. And there's also going to be moments and time, like sometimes long periods of time, where there's concessions made in order to get to that goal, right? Something I'll explain to people that have maybe brought a puppy into their life is that's a great goal. Say, for example, one of their things that they really want to do is take the dog. We live in Sydney, lovely weather. So a lot of big common goal is to just go to a cafe with their dog and sit down and have breakfast. Doesn't sound like much, but we live in a really busy city, and that can be quite taxing on the dog. Now, in order to foster that relationship, we have to take on board, this is like, it's maybe like a good way to, one lens to look at this through a practical model. Like, you've got a goal, and that goal is neither good nor bad, it just is what it is. But in order to get there, like, you might get Wonder Puppy that turns up to your doorstep and you go straight out to a cafe and he's like, brilliant, I'm gonna fall asleep, see you later, mate, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's also
a unicorn.
A unicorn, right?
Yeah.
You've got to contend with the Australian culture of your dog is definitely my property to be able to pat, which your dog might not like. You've got to contend with, there's probably 10 other people at this cafe that also want to sit there with their dogs. So now you've got close proximity of dogs. You've got foot traffic, you've got busy streets, all of these stimulus that we have to potentially navigate and help our dogs feel comfortable with. And that, in order to create that relationship, that ideal life that we had in mind, we have to take on both sides of the relationship, right? How do I get there? How I have to relate to my dog, and in order to do that, I need to listen to them and communicate with them effectively, and I need to understand that all they are communicating is, if it's good or bad, whether or not their fundamental enrichment needs have been met or not.
Yeah. Yes, and that's important, isn't it? So there's a term, it's kind of a human psychology term, which is negotiated safety. And that's really important in relationships because, there are things that Kieran, my husband, wants to do, things I'm not so keen on, and vice versa. So we negotiate that safety. But that comes from having that strong relational base and trust. So you can compromise on some of those things. Because, as you said, Ian, it's not often black and white. There's stuff in the middle, and I have to think about my needs sometimes, as well as my dog's needs, as well as my husband's. So we have to find that bit, and that's that negotiated safety. And I think this fits very well, again, the care model with that whole process, really, of what those compromises might look like. But they're big, even quite big asks of our dog or asks of our partner can be really manageable when that foundation is really strong. Little things can be really hard to negotiate through that negotiated safety if those things aren't right.
Well, I mean, with any relationship, you've got to build a foundation of trust and safety, whether that's with a partner or a friendship or your dog. If you don't have that strong foundation of trust and having the dog feel safe, so when you put them in a situation that is foreign to them, that you have that strength of foundation and safety, that if the dog's are not okay, that they may look at you and go, do you know what, I'm not okay. And we go, okay, we're just going to adjust things for you. This isn't something that you're okay with. So, you know, the cafe situation, you know, and, you know, words you used before in terms of compromise, you know, what does that even, what does that look like? And what does that mean in terms of, you know, because sometimes when people hear the word compromise, they see it as something really negative. It's like, well, I am not getting what I want. So we have to differentiate between the words want and need. As you know, because there is that, well, I want, that's wonderful, but what are your needs? You know, I want lots of things, but there's a lot of things that I don't need.
And that in itself is really that's where advocacy can really step up, right? Because let's go back to our cafe example. I want to take my dog to a cafe, but my dog needs the affordance to be desensitized gradually. And so you, in order to get to where you want, you have to advocate for your dog's needs. And that's going to be, you know, two-sided. There's going to be times as well where, and this is the reality of the situation as well, there's also going to be times where you notice that one of your dog's enrichment needs is, let's say it's running off lead. Like it just needs freedom of movement. Now, the caregiver's comfort and perception of safety might be compromised if they see their dog running free. That can actually, for a lot of our clients, that might trigger quite an anxious response. Oh my God, my dog might get run over, my dog might run away from me, all of these things. So that client might want to feel would feel more comfortable and might want their dog to be next to them. Now, there we've got the other end of the scale where we actually have a dog's needs, but the caregiver's wants getting in the way of meeting the dog's needs. So we would flip that. It's not just about us. What we're not saying here is that you have to just give into your dog's enrichment needs all the time and all of that. It's very much a model that we have to look at it through both lenses, because sometimes you've got a human's needs that need to be met, but the dog's wants have to actually take second place. But like any relationship, they develop, and hopefully in the direction where there are, you know, you come to a happy medium and you come to a place where you go, okay, we're actually living a very healthy lifestyle, a very healthy relationship. But it's noticing them in the first place.
And that's where Kim's legs comes in, especially the understanding of breed traits, how many intrinsic needs are heavily programmed in. They're not just a want, and how many dogs really struggle emotionally and mentally because those needs aren't met. So this is a good t-shirt, right? Don't let your wants overshadow your dog's needs. We need that as a thing, right? So we'll copyright that. So that's awesome. Okay, do you know what? It's got flown by, and I just love this, and this is what I love about seeing other people filter stuff through their own kind of way of looking at stuff, because this has invigorated a lot of these things for me, because it's just thinking about it a little bit differently, and hopefully it's done the same for the people listening in. We mentioned at the top of the hour that you very kindly invited me onto your podcast, the older podcast that you did, but you know, you've got a new podcast which is coming out when? Tell us about it. And also, I've had the privilege of the honor of being on it again. This is all very exciting. Tell us about the podcast.
The podcast is for caregivers. It is.
Which is good, right? Yeah, I think that's important. It's a good thing to have for the caregivers, because a lot of them are quite trainery oriented, aren't they?
They are. Andy, before we dive into that, I just want to highlight we haven't talked about enrichment yet. Are we running out of time?
Oh, no. I thought you had a little bit. Sorry, no, of course. Yeah, no, we can have extra time. So
let's circle back to the pod, because we do. I'd love to just not, not dwell on it too much, but enrichment in itself, we have touched on it, and that's what we were saying right at the start. They are all encompassing, so we can't mention any one of them really without bringing up the other. But enrichment in itself is a huge topic, and I mean, I think if we talk about it very like at the surface level, a lot of people probably thinking, the Kongs and the licky mats and giving a dog a chew or the opportunity to sniff. But enrichment for me, and sorry, I'm just going to run off this little tangent.
You do you.
we kind of actually took a lot from Ali Bender and Emily Stronger's work in terms of what are those all-encompassing enrichment needs. I think there's 14 of them in their model. And God, I am not going to try and name every single one of them off the top of my head, but things like safety, things like freedom of expression of natural behaviors, things like sleep and rest and decompression, health, of course. When we look at the dog's enrichment needs, there is those all-encompassing everything that the dog needs to feel comfortable in their own skin and just feel that element of satisfaction. And I've mentioned already, when we look at dog behavior, we look at it through a dialogue lens, then communicating normally an expression that there is an enrichment need that is currently in deficit, right? And say it's attention. Well, then there's social needs in that moment being communicated that, hey, look, I'm in deficit of my social needs right now. I'd really like some affection and interaction. And then when we can bring that into Kim's legs model, we can really start to use enrichment proactively and as a reaction model. So advocating in the first place of like, how do I know what your enrichment needs are and how do I try to meet them proactively is a preventative way of, a preventative method of preventing undesirable behaviors. But then if they do come up, and they will, because anybody we live with will piss you off at some point, rather than looking at it through good and bad, and we've talked a lot in the past, me and you, Andy, about the lens of good and bad behavior, we'll look at the expression of that enrichment need not being met. And now I can go into a solution-oriented approach and going, right, I believe that this enrichment need isn't being met. So now I can step up and try this to see if it's being met. And that's my communication back to them and going, hey, how does this feel if I do this? And does it resolve your problem to ultimately resolve mine?
Well, I mean, with the enrichment, it encompasses the rest of the care approach. It is, and as you said, it's not good or bad behavior. The behavior is information for us to then really take a step back and identify what is not suitable, what is not working for the dog at that time, in that context, in that situation. And for us because that's their communication to us. So then we need to communicate back and advocate and relate to them as the individual. Dr. Susan Friedman's, behavior is the study of one, of the individual that's in front of us. It's not just, oh, well, the dog I had before, all I needed to do was this, which we hear a lot of. My previous dog, all I did was this. What do we see with the individual in front of us? What are the legs that we need to take it into consideration of this individual dog? And how can I enrich their lives, taking into consideration what their legs are, as well as our own? We bring dogs into our lives to enrich our lives. We have that desire to feel loved, go on walks, talk to the dog, whatever your relationship might be with the dog. but it is really going, okay, I chose you and I need to make sure that I take into consideration what your enrichment needs are. So whether, if you've got a particular, like a specific breed, so let's say a working breed, simple things like where they sleep can be really important. You wouldn't put a working breed in the middle of a lounge room with a house full of 7 people. Now that dog's never going to sleep, because the consistent movement, because of the way we bred working breeds, is they respond to movement in their environment. So where they will sleep will be really important. And if we start to see behaviors that are not favorable, then that might be the first point of call where we look. We go, okay, well, is your dog sleeping? Oh yeah, well, they're in the lounge room and they get up every time someone comes in, or, if the TV is switched on, and, that would be the first thing that we would go, okay, well, you're not sleeping, so you're not resting, you're not getting the ability to reconcile everything that you've learned through the day, which means your irritability or your cup's already full through the day, which then might become why we're seeing these particular behaviors.
Yeah, good. I'm glad we've had a bit of extra time for enrichment, because I think I've just come back from a three-day conference with given by Amber Batson. Amazing 3 days, a lot of it on the gut biome and things like that, but she touched a lot on enrichment actually, and how it's misinterpreted, and by its very nature it has to be enriching, not just doing something that you would normally do but a little bit different. It has to be something that does that, and a lot of those kind of intrinsic needs that we were talking about a minute ago in the context is directly related to enrichment. So it is really important. And I love it. And we've got some great sayings today. I've been writing them all down. So I can pinch them now. So that we can remember them, because this notion of having something that's solution oriented, I like that, because, I talk often about the difference between a task oriented and a care oriented. But actually that's a more dynamic version of a care-oriented approach. It's a solution-oriented one, which on its own could be either way, but because we're putting it within this care model, it is a solution that is right for the whole, which is awesome. Brilliant. Oh, that's great. I've had an absolute blast tonight, and I really appreciate you getting everything for it, for sure. And it's nice, for me to have these conversations where I've come away feeling like quite pingy in my brain, and I'm definitely pinging. There's a lot of things here that I'm going to think about. So yes, tell us about the podcast.
Thank you. So the podcast is there for caregivers, but of course, like anybody can tune in, professionals, dog enthusiasts. It's pretty much for anybody interested in dog behavior and training and health. We bring on guests like yourself. You're on next week. So thank you so much for coming on. It's hosted by both of us. Some episodes are with just me, some episodes are the two of us. And we just try to talk about all things dog. The whole point is to bring people's awareness into different elements of dog to light. And it's the backbone of Canine Caregivers, which is our online platform, and which is it's essentially all these little mini courses to be able to do exactly the same. I think our bottom line goal from day one has been to help as many dogs as possible, and Canine Caregivers in itself was kind of born out of a little bit of frustration from only being able to help one person at a time. So the courses and the membership models that we have at Canine Caregivers is there to be able to just support more people in being able to live happier and healthier lives with their dogs.
Well, yeah, creating a community of caregivers where they can learn the information that I think is just sometimes not at the forefront of the internet, or especially social media. So building small little courses that we have that are the basis of the foundation of the care approach itself. so people can learn what they just don't know, because it comes down to, you don't know what you don't know. And it's not that we should be looking at caregivers when they're not doing the right things with their dogs with a lens of, well, you're doing the wrong thing. They don't know what they don't know. And the information that they've learned and where that has come from is, again, at the forefront a lot of the internet and social media. So what we want to do by, doing the lives that we do every Wednesday of just, Ian and I back and forthing about, some subject that we come up with 2 seconds before we go live, but also, collaborating with other people in the industry like yourself, and some other great guests that we've got on the podcast, but also on the membership group where we've got these little courses, because we want to be able to cover everything dog, so that people can go, do you know what, I just need to learn about this. And some of the courses might only be 20 minutes long.
Right.
We did one on what you do when you bring a new dog into your home, whether it's a puppy or a rescue dog, because there's a lot of people that just don't know what to do. They bring it in and they've Googled, what do you do when you first bring a dog into the home? And obviously all they want to do is love on them. But there's a lot of things that we're, creating that care approach and the foundation that people don't understand to cover. So, yeah.
Well, that sounds amazing. So Mary asks where she can find the podcast. So what we'll do is we'll make sure we will send a link. Make sure we put a link in with this chat in the group, and then make sure you share things in the group as we go along. We've had some great comments, so that's great to see. So thank you everybody for coming in. It's always I always enjoy our conversations, Ian, and I love how you see these things, and it's great to meet you as well now, Dominique, and I can see why you two get on so well, because you clearly have a very similar foundation, but you have your own way of looking at it, and I think that's such a healthy thing in that relationship. And the only not the only, but the big winners are going to be the dogs, and especially the caregivers. And I love your focus on caregivers as well. A lot of the stuff I see put out, written for the general public or done for the general public, is really kind of written and put out for other trainers to look at. So it's nice to get something that's, this is generally for you caregivers. We're going to make it small. We're going to make it bite-sized. We're going to make it simple, so you can think about it and think about what that means for you and me and your dog. Great, good, great thanks in the group. So just to let people know, we've got some great lives coming up with Roman Gottfried. We've got Mish Masters and Jack Fenton all coming up soon. I can't remember the dates, but I'll be in the thing anyway. But thank you both so much. Where can people find more Dominic and Ian?
Well, if you go on to caninecaregivers.com.au, so that's the website.
And the podcast itself is called Unleashed and Unhinged. We haven't actually said that yet.
No.
Yeah. So good. That's why you got me on, because I'm the unhinged, obviously. That's great. I love that. That's a great title. Excellent. Well, we'll make sure we get all these. I'll get you to ping over those links to me, and I can make sure we put it in the thing. Thank you both for getting up so early for us. I really appreciate it, and it'd be great to have you back again in the not too distant future. And Ian, you're coming to the UK next year, so hopefully we can get together and have that beer. That would be nice.
Sounds good to me, mate.
Are you coming as well, Dominic? Are you?
No, I don't think so.
Not this time.
Okay.
Not this time. There will be a stage that I will, because I'd love to meet you in person. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Andrew.
Yeah, very much.
Brilliant. Good. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in, wherever you are, whatever the time of day it might be. Thank you for watching, and please take care of yourself. Bye.